this is what religious persecution in Nigeria looks like. It is violent, it is brutal, and it is worsening, despite the fact that attack against Christians had increased. Former Secretary of State Antony Blinken later suggested in a meeting with USCIRF members, which I was present, that these massacres were caused by climate change, that desperate Fulani herders were simply looking for pasture land. Let me be clear, this is not about climate change. It's about a violent extremist ideology that seeks to eliminate Christianity from Nigeria's northern and central regions. The evidence is undeniable. This is systematic religious violence. The U.S. government must act, and they must act now. Nigeria must be redesignated a country of particular concern.
So, my people, finally, Tinubu government is talking about insecurity in Nigeria due to the fear of U.S. sanctions. So, you guys know that U.S. has Foreign Affairs Committee presented like what is happening in Nigeria, which they called conflict and persecution in Nigeria. You know, they are talking about insecurity, especially Fulani herdsmen's killings. So, due to that, Tinubu yesterday summoned bishops in Nigeria, and look at what he said, that this insecurity affects everyone, Christians and Muslims alike, that he has no religious bias, that he is not a bigot, that even his wife is a pastor in a Redeemed Christian church. Like my people, you guys have seen what is happening in Nigeria. And we have been saying here, like, why is Nigeria government keeping quiet when it comes to this Fulani herdsmen's killings? And right now, this is what Tinubu is saying. He admitted that, yes, there is insecurity. Then what are they doing about it, my people? And this is what the propaganda they are carrying up and down, that the insecurity has reduced. And now Tinubu accepted that, yes, there is insecurity. It doesn't matter if it's Christians or Muslims, because every life matters. What is Tinubu government doing about this insecurity in Nigeria? Even sometimes it seems that they are kind of protecting all these bandits and the Fulani herdsmen. Because right now, Fulani herdsmen will come to your land and tell you that if you refuse to give them their land, whatever you see, you take. A lot of killings are going on in Nigeria. Like, how many times have you seen Tinubu come out to address the issue of insecurity? So now they are running helter-skelter, gathering pastors and bishops just to make sure that they carry on with this propaganda of insecurity is reducing in Nigeria. Why it is getting worse, my people. Take a look at this video and see how U.S. House of Foreign Affairs Committee present and also give testimonies of what is happening in Nigeria when it comes to insecurity.
The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the deteriorating state of religious freedom in Nigeria and the urgent need to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern pursuant to the International Religious Freedom Act. I would like to recognize myself for an opening comment, and we'll yield to my friend and colleague, Ms. Jacobs, for any opening comments she might have, and members of the subcommittee. According to the Catholic News Agency and EWTN News, quote, Archbishop Ignatius Kagama is concerned over the seemingly endless violence against Christians that claimed at least 58 lives this past weekend and hundreds of others in recent weeks. It is our prayer, he said, that something definitive will be done to stop the situation that is inhuman. Shockingly, that was more than a dozen years ago and part of my opening remarks at a hearing that I held on July 10th, 2012, one of several hearings, 8 in all, on religious persecution in Nigeria. And since then, things have only gotten worse. 1 year later, in 2013, I visited Archbishop Kagama in Jos, Nigeria. We visited churches, 5 of them that had been recently firebombed by Boko Haram, and spent hours listening to survivors tell their stories. Despite their numbing loss and pain, I was absolutely amazed at the survivors about their faith, very deep faith, their courage and the resilience. They were not going to quit, but they were looking to the government for help, and it was not coming. I also met with an evangelical believer named Habila Adamu. Dragged from his home by Boko Haram terrorists, he was ordered to renounce his faith. With an AK-47 pressed to his face, he was asked, "Are you ready to die as a Christian?" With extraordinary courage, Habila answered, "Yes, I am ready to die as a Christian." He was asked a second time, and he repeated his answer. His wife was pleading, "Please don't kill my husband." And yet he said, "Yes, I am ready to die as a Christian." This time, the terrorist pulled the trigger. A bullet ripped through Habilla's face. He crumpled to the ground, bleeding profusely, left for dead. By some miracle, he survived. I met him at an IDP camp in Jos. I asked him to come to Washington to tell his story. He did. And at the congressional hearing, he said this to our subcommittee, this subcommittee: "I am alive because God wants you to have this message. Knowing Christ is so much deeper than merely knowing Boko Haram's story of hate and intolerance." He closed his testimony with this: "Do everything you can to end this ruthless religious persecution, but know Christ first." To the end, everything he did was to witness, to radiate his love for God, but he was also calling on us to get involved and do something. Since then, however, the wanton violence against Christians in Nigeria has grown significantly worse. A couple of days ago, the Pillar Catholic reported, and I quote, "While Christians are receiving ashes last Wednesday to begin Lent, news broke out in Nigeria that a priest had been brutally murdered by kidnappers who had stormed his rectory the night before and kidnapped him. With deep sorrow and righteous indignation, I condemn in the strongest terms the relentless and tragic wave of kidnappings targeting priests, pastoral agents, and the faithful," Bishop Kundi said in a March 7th, just a couple days ago, press conference, which expressed outrage over the kidnaps and the brutal murder of his priests. According to the sources in the diocese, Father Sylvester was bound by his kidnappers. He was shot in the head, and I saw the picture. It is heartbreaking to look at. Shot at close range with an assault rifle, and according to the officials of his diocese. The systematic slaughter and abuse of Nigerian believers must stop. Delay is denial and a death sentence to so many. One of our distinguished witnesses today, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe of the Diocese of Makurdi, Nigeria, traveled a long distance to be with us today and will testify, and this is from his testimony. Militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists. They steal and vandalize. They kill and boast about it. They kidnap and rape, and they enjoy total impunity for this from the elected officials. None of them, I repeat his quote, "None of them have been arrested and brought to justice." In December of 2020, President Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern, only to be reversed without justification by Secretary Blinken in November of 2021. And I know I asked him at hearings. I asked him privately, but also asked him at open hearings, why? Never got a good answer. Religious leaders in Nigeria were outraged by the Secretary's decision. One Nigerian bishop challenged the Secretary and said, "Christian persecution is more intense than ever." And that was Bishop Mamza. And Genocide Watch has called Nigeria a killing field of defenseless Christians, quote unquote. Yet the government of Nigeria has failed to make progress against religiously motivated persecution of Christians, despite religious freedom being enshrined as an essential human right in their constitution. Likewise, Nigerian legal framework supports pluralism at both federal and state levels, but glaring contradictions exist, especially with laws that criminalize blasphemy, some even carrying the death penalty. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, was, quote, appalled that the State Department did not redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. USCIRF had recommended, and we have the former chairman here, Tony Perkins, had recommended this designation 4 years in a row, from 2021 to 2024, and said, quote, "There is no justification as to why the State Department continues to fail to redesignate Nigeria as a CPC." And again, CPC, as you know, carries significant sanctions, a whole broad array of sanctions that the President and the Secretary of State are empowered to level on a country that commits persecution. When the former Secretary of State Blinken held a joint press conference with the Nigerian Foreign Minister on January 23, 2024, following the Christmas Eve massacre, which targeted killings by radical Fulani terrorists and took the lives of hundreds of Christians, he did offer his condolences, and I watched it. I was glad to see that. But we need to take it beyond just saying, "I feel sorry for you." And these Christian killings recurred the following year, just 3 months ago. Make no mistake, these ongoing attacks are based on religion and diverting attention from it tonight. So let me just say parenthetically, I tried for 3 years to get the Clinton administration to designate Boko Haram as an FTO, of the Obama administration, as a foreign terrorist organization. I held hearing after hearing, and they wouldn't do it. On the day I was marking up my legislation to do this, just that, State Department said, oh, we're going to designate them an FTO. And after all the crimes they were committing, later it was the Chibok girls, it was all the other atrocities being committed by Boko Haram, and they wouldn't even give them the FTO status so we could start investigating where they get their money, their weapons, and the like. Make no mistake, all of these attacks are based on religion, like I said, and diverting attention from it denies that we have seen with our own eyes. This is religious cleansing. It needs to stop, and the perpetrators need to be brought to justice. Last year, the House Foreign Affairs did adopt my resolution, HRES 82, calling on the Biden administration to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. It passed exactly 1 year ago, almost a year ago, in the committee, but it never came to the floor. While I strongly believe that President Trump will again designate Nigeria as a CPC and do much more to assist the persecuted church, including the outreach to the Nigerian president, Tinubu, last night I did reintroduce the resolution, and I hope we will have a robust debate and it will get marked up. Help can't come fast enough. The killing fields are every day, every single day, and we need to do more and do everything within our power to try to mitigate it. Let's not forget these horrifying facts. Northern Nigeria, and this is just northern Nigeria alone, has seen the destruction of over 18,000 churches since 2009. 18,000 churches. I saw 5 of them, totally burnt out, and many people killed with car bombs and the like. An August 2024 report from the Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa found that 55,910 people were killed and 21,000 people were abducted in the context of terror groups in Nigeria within just 4 years, from October 2019 to September 2023. I would point out that approximately 34,000 are moderate Muslims that have been murdered in Islamic attacks, and we speak out for them as well. I have met with imams in Nigeria, and if they speak, they're visited that following week by one of these radical Islamist groups, and it's not pretty. They'll kill them or do other kinds of mischief. About 5 million Christians have been displaced and forced into internally displaced person camps, IDP camps, within Nigeria. The 2023 watch list released in January by Open Doors this past January, found that 89% of Christians, 89% of the Christians who are martyred in the world are in one country, Nigeria. The targeted violence starkly highlights the precarious state of religious freedom in Nigeria. Again, we're asking the president, Tinubu, he's got to take action. And we're going to, I'm hoping to lead a delegation to Nigeria. We've got to raise these issues. But it starts at the top. I've been to Abuja many times. The president has real power. He can do it. And we're calling on him to do that. Let me also say that and I will put the rest of my statement into the record, but this hearing, we're hoping will be a catalyst for action by our own government and also by Congress and, of course, above all, the executive branch. The new president has a lot to do, and I think he'll do this. And then, if necessary, impose sanctions. Where that has happened, there is change. Where it doesn't happen, the status quo, the killing fields continue. Leads is where the worst of the violent persecution in Nigeria is occurring by militant Fulani, causing the highest number of displaced people living in internally displaced camps. Matter of fact, those camps are the source of daily attacks by the militant Islamic extremists. And one of the things that I have raised with Nigerian leaders, and I hope that the president will raise it himself, our president here in the United States, is that if we had an act of some kind, theft, murder, anything, and you call the police and they don't show up, that's what's happening throughout Nigeria. The delay becomes denial, and then there's no investigation and nobody is held to account. It's unbelievable that can exist, but it does.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jacobs and members of the subcommittee, for prioritizing conflict and persecution in Nigeria as your very first hearing of this subcommittee for this session. And Chairman Smith, you've been a congressional hero to legions of persecuted victims of persecution around the world, and congratulations on your leadership of this subcommittee, your chairmanship. My testimony will focus on the persecution of Christian farming communities by militant Fulani Muslim herders. In the interest of time, I will not address the Islamist terror groups that are already designated as terrorist and sanctioned by the U.S. government. They include Boko Haram and the Islamic State of West Africa, which attacks Nigerians of all faith backgrounds. Nigeria now ranks 6 out of 66 on the just released 2025 Global Terrorism Index. Nigeria is the world's deadliest country for Christians, according to the respected group Open Doors. Currently, militant groups of nomadic Fulani Muslim herders are reported by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, among others, to be the greatest threat to Nigerian Christians, particularly those that we're now seeing in the Middle Belt farming communities. In Benue, Plateau, Kaduna, and other Middle Belt states, thousands of Christians have been killed, maimed, and raped, and millions of them have been driven from their lands and are now homeless due to Fulani attacks. This is the heart of Nigeria's breadbasket, and as their farming families are slaughtered or forced to flee, the region's suffering is compounded by growing mass hunger. Moreover, the targeted indigenous people of the Middle Belt Christian communities face the Nigerian government's decision to tolerate this persecution. The federal government in Abuja remains passive in the face of desperate cries for help. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees reports of Mimi, one of 2 million IDPs, internally displaced persons, in Benue State. She survived a Fulani attack 3 years ago while her family was tending the yam fields on her farm. It reports, when they looked up, they saw armed men. There was no time to run. The men raped and killed Mimi's 11-year-old daughter. Mimi herself was raped, and her husband was killed. A hunter later found her injured and unconscious and helped her into the bush. They hid her there for 2 days before it was safe enough for him to bring her to the camp. There she received medical treatment and reunited with her 2 sons, now aged 12 and 15. I lost everything, says Mimi. If you go to my village, everything has been burned down. I cannot farm any longer. And it's not only me, we all went through these things. The government allows Fulani violence to continue with impunity. There is broad concern that this reflects a plan to forcibly Islamize Nigeria in violation of its secular constitution. Last week, the Nigerian Catholic Bishops' Conference released a letter expressing deep concern that some of the 12 northern states that impose Sharia law ordered Catholic and other Christian schools closed for 5 weeks in forced observance of Ramadan, and they cited the Constitution's guarantee of a secular state. Over the last generation, a portion of the Fulani nomadic herder population has become well-armed with automatic weapons and aggressive in targeting undefended Christians in Nigeria's Middle Belt farming areas. Various observers on the ground assert that the Fulani militants are not attacking to graze cattle, as some maintain, but rather to drive out the Christians from their ancestral lands and to take control of land, of villages and larger geographic areas. The UNHCR report above states, quote, nearly all the 3,790 registered residents of Ichwa IDP camp and many other camps dotted around Benue State were smallholder farmers, forced here by violent land grabs. A Benue Catholic priest told reporters it's all about seizing the lands and changing the demography of Benue State. The Fulani terrorists want to seize the fertile lands of Benue, chase away the people from the land, and occupy the lands for themselves, he said. A 2023 study by Nigerian scholars on Plateau State found the great majority of Plateau's indigenous people from non-Fulani ethnic groups believe that Fulani violence is motivated by land grabbing, jihad, and Fulanization, compared with smaller percentages who blame cattle rustling. Cattle rustling does occur, but Fulani attacks are indiscriminate and devastate entire Christian villages. Ignoring citizens' appeals for help, Nigeria's government fails to effectively stop these attacks. Take Benue, where a Catholic priest and other Christians were recently abducted in Fulani raids. A priest identified to the press 3 key areas along the Benue River, and he names them. It's in my testimony, where Fulani terrorists crossed from Nasarawa state to attack overwhelmingly Christian villages in Benue. The government ignores church pleas to place military posts near these known hotspots or have naval patrols on the river, a Benue priest told me. Or Kaduna, where on February 26th, Truth Nigeria reported over 200 Christians are being held hostage, starved, and tortured in a camp near an army base in a wooded area off the busy Kaduna-Abuja expressway. It came to light when 3 months after being abducted from their homes, 8 hostages in dire condition were released after a ransom payment of equivalent to $27,000 US. They had been chained, whipped, and starved and referred to as infidels by captives speaking the Fulani's Fulfulde language. They witnessed others dying from starvation or shot dead when the ransoms didn't come. And as far as we know, it's still there. And just last weekend, a Christian from Adamawa State, Sunday Jackson, had a death penalty upheld by the High Court of Nigeria for, in self-defense, killing an attacker on his property. The pontifical aid to the church in need counts scores of priests' kidnappings in Nigeria, with over 20 murdered in recent years. 7 Catholic priests have been kidnapped since January. A week ago, Father Sylvester of St. Mary's Church in Kaduna was kidnapped and slain. 2 pastors in Kaduna and Gombe states with the Evangelical Church of Winning All were murdered this year already. Abuja's Archbishop Kagame strongly criticized the escalating kidnappings of Catholic priests, citing, quote, poor leadership at all levels, local government, state government, and federal government. Some conclude that Abuja's passivity, including failing even to collect data on the attacks, shows government complicity. The board chair of the Nigerian private group International Society for Civil Liberties and the Rule of Law is among them. The State Department report on international religious freedom solely gives a neo-Marxian materialistic theory for Fulani aggression. It describes the relentless attacks against Christian farming families on their own farms and violence against priests and pastors in their church and rectories as clashes between 2 rural socioeconomic groups fighting over scarce natural resources, a result of climate change. It ignores the evidence. It overlooks possible radicalization of Fulani herdsmen who travel across porous borders in the Sahel and northeastern Nigeria, regions recognized by the U.S. government as terror hotbeds. It shows no concern for their automatic weapons, distributed reportedly by the Mayeti groups, the cattle breeders, lobbying association members. It disregards the Nigerian government's toleration of this violence by allowing it to continue with impunity. I therefore urge Congress to call for the State Department as a first step to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. I am certain that the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom will soon renew its recommendation of CPC designation for Nigeria. Placing Nigeria on the U.S.'s short list of the world's most egregious religious freedom violators is warranted and would be a foundation for further human rights initiatives by the new administration here. It is the law. It's standing up for religious freedom is part of American exceptionalism. It's part of our heritage, our traditions, and our Constitution to respect the unalienable right of religious freedom. That concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Ms. Shea, thank you so very much for your testimony, for your decades of dedication to this important issue. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Jacobs, and members of the subcommittee. First, let me thank you for your opening comments. It's refreshing to see we have agreement. We understand that there is a problem. Now coming to a solution is our challenge. So thank you for your insight. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Tony Perkins. I served as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom from 2018 to 2022. And as the chairman said, I served as both chair and vice chair. From my time on USERF, I can tell you with certainty that the world is not paying enough attention to the growing humanitarian disaster in Nigeria. Despite its strategic importance as Africa's most populous country, these warning lights are flashing because of this systematic religious persecution driven primarily by Islamists, and it's going unaddressed. Christians are the primary targets. They're murdered, kidnapped, raped, and terrorized on almost a daily basis, as has already been discussed. The numbers are staggering. The brutality is unspeakable, and the silence from global leaders is deafening. Let me share just one recent example. On February 9th, Fulani terrorists armed with AK-47s, these are not hunting rifles, these are rifles designed to kill. I served, after coming out of the Marine Corps, I worked with the State Department in anti-terrorism and very familiar with the mode and operation of terrorists. They stormed a village in Gombe State. They first seized a 9-year-old boy from the Puma family and demanded ransom. They then sought out the Reverend Bala Galadima's home. They found him, they broke into his home, they demanded money. He pleaded with them, saying that he had none, but he offered them what he had. He had grain, so he offered them grain. They refused. They shot him 3 times, killing him. Sadly, this is not an isolated incident. In late January, Boko Haram launched a series of coordinated attacks on Christian villages in Chibok, the same region where 276 schoolgirls were kidnapped in 2014, Mr. Chairman. You'll remember that. We discussed it then. In fact, many of those girls remain captives to this day. The terrorists set homes and churches ablaze, destroyed livestock, and demanded that Christians convert or they die. More than 4,000 believers have been forced to flee for their lives in recent weeks alone. As has been mentioned, according to Open Doors, more Christians are murdered for their faith in Nigeria than any other country in the world. In 2024 alone, 3,100 Christians were killed. 2,830 were kidnapped. These are not just numbers. These are fathers, their mothers, their children, their families. The case of Leah Sheribu underscores the horror of this crisis. Leah was just 14 years old when Boko Haram kidnapped her and 108 other girls from their school in 2018. The terrorists eventually released all the girls except Leah. Why? Because she refused to renounce her Christian faith. Reports suggest she is still alive and now held as a prize by her captors as she has been forced to bear children in captivity. As a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, I met with her family multiple times and worked with the previous administration to track her, hopefully trying to gain her freedom. We were not successful. This is what religious persecution in Nigeria looks like. It is violent, it is brutal, and it is worsening. In 2020, the Trump administration, based on recommendations from USERF, and I was a part of that leadership team, Nigeria was designated as a country of particular concern. This was an essential step, recognizing the Nigerian government was failing to protect religious minorities from systematic violence. Yet in 2021, the Biden administration inexplicably removed Nigeria's CPC designation, despite the fact that attack against Christians had increased. Former Secretary of State Antony Blinken later suggested in a meeting with USERF members, which I was present, that these massacres were caused by climate change, that desperate Fulani herders were simply looking for pasture land. Let me be clear, this is not about climate change. It's about a violent extremist ideology that seeks to eliminate Christianity from Nigeria's northern and central regions. The evidence is undeniable. This is systematic religious violence. The U.S. government must act, and they must act now. Nigeria must be redesignated a country of particular concern. The Biden administration's removal of this designation was a reckless mistake that emboldened the very terrorists who are slaughtering Christians. The evidence overwhelmingly meets the legal threshold under the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. which requires CPC status for governments that engage in or tolerate severe violations of religious freedom. That's exactly what Nigeria's government has done. It has failed to protect all of its citizens from religious violence. The U.S. must impose consequences. Under the International Religious Freedom Act, the President has the authority to take action against CPC-designated nations, including economic penalties. The U.S. should apply targeted sanctions against Nigerian officials who are complicit in religious persecution, as well as suspend certain trade benefits until concrete actions are taken to protect all Nigerians. Religious freedom protection must be tied to U.S.-Nigerian relations. The administration should make it clear that Nigeria's treatment of religious minorities will directly impact diplomatic and economic relations, including trade agreements and security assistance. And finally, the U.S. must reappoint a strong, high-profile ambassador for international religious freedom. During the first Trump administration, this role was used effectively under the leadership of Ambassador Sam Brownback to apply global pressure on persecuting nations. The momentum for that must be regained. In closing, Mr. Chairman, it is time for the United States to send an unmistakable message, to draw a red line. The slaughter of Christians and other religious minorities in Nigeria will not be tolerated. If Nigeria continues to allow terrorists to burn churches, execute pastors, and kidnap schoolgirls with impunity, there must be consequences. This is not just about Nigeria. It is about the future of religious freedom, the stability of Africa, the moral credibility of the United States. If we fail to act, make no mistake about it, this crisis will spread. Refugees will flood into neighboring countries. Terrorists will grow bolder. And America's silence will embolden jihadists worldwide. Chairman Smith, members of the committee, thank you for helping raise awareness of the need to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. The world is watching, but more importantly, the religious persecution and those who are the victims of that in Nigeria are watching. They're waiting to see if America will stand with them and for them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome to Shamrasi News TV.